Hello, you curious people. Welcome back to Curiosity Podcast. The following is a conversation with Professor Emilie Caspar. She is a world-famous neuroscientist at Ghent University, Belgium. She specialises in social and cognitive neuroscience, and her research interests include free will, moral responsibility, sense of agency, voluntary actions, forensic psychology and psychiatry, psychopathology and antisocial behaviour, robotics, and more. It was a wonderful conversation with her. We know each other for a few years now, and the time has finally arrived for a podcast with her. She recently released a book called Just Following Orders Atrocities and the Brain Science of Obedience, how obedience and carrying out orders can lead to horrific acts such as the Holocaust or other genocides like in Rwanda and Combodia. We talk a bit about free will initially, and then we delve deep into her book. I hope you enjoy this conversation. We had a really fascinating and insightful conversation. So, you curious people, please welcome Professor Emilie Caspar. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Curiosity Podcast. Today we have with us famous neuroscientist Emilie Caspar. She's from Belgium. She recently released a book called Just Following Orders that you should all read. I listened to the audiobook. Maybe you can listen to the audiobook as well. It's really fascinating. You should check out. So, hi, Emilie. Welcome to the channel. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for the invitation.
So, Emilie is just back after voting in Belgium. It's election day in Belgium. So my first question to Emilie would be that, did you vote with your own free will?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say it's something like the voting process, to have it with your own free will. It's very important that it respects some conditions, because when we vote, we are actually constantly influenced by many things. Of course, you have like what the party can offer, but you also have influences from what your relatives may vote, your family or your friends or larger social groups. And so something that is very important, because we know that there are a lot of influences of others on our voting preference, that when we go to vote, we are in isolated voting booth. And so that's what happened here. So yeah, we all make the queue, but then when we enter the voting booth, we can just hide what we're doing, and we can vote with our own decision. Nobody can see it. It's fully anonymous. And I think, we may not have a real free will, but at least we make the most free decision that we can in this context.
Right. So, like Emilie says, we don't have real free will. What she means by real free will is a libertarian free will, like I talk about in the channel. Libertarian free will is the ability to do otherwise than what you actually end up doing. So I think Emilie and I align on that view, that libertarian free will doesn't exist, but still you can have compatibilist free will, which is free will that is not dependent on external forces. So if you can make your own decisions with your own desires and intentions, which is not influenced by external forces, then you can be said to have free will, compatibilist free will. But yeah, even your own desires are actually influenced by external forces, or even your own genes, your own brain, your neuropsychology, neurophysiology. So at the end of the day, bottom line is that free will doesn't exist. But yeah, you can have free will, which is not constrained by external impediments, which is called compatibilist free will. So, right. So
yeah.
So yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, no, I think that indeed, I agree with your division of real free will. And I think it's hard because, all the decisions that we make, we may think they are free because we have the subjective experience of it, but actually all our decisions are influenced by many elements that are not even conscious for us, like past experiences, sensory processing of our environment. Our brain does compute all this, but it doesn't necessarily reach consciousness. And all our decisions are influenced by these hundreds of additional
factors,
elements. So that's where I don't see where exactly we should put free will inside this.
Exactly. Right way to put it. So, Emily, like you have done experiments like Libet experiments before. You've worked under Patrick Haggard. I wanted to know if there are any new experiments that are being done, like Libet experiments, searching for free will.
Yeah. Yeah, honestly, so nowadays my topic has a bit moved forward more coercion, so I would say lack of free will, especially during genocides when people follow orders. But I'm not aware of any major groundbreaking new method that would have been published recently to really go with the argument of free will or no free will. What I see, though, is that there are some more and more researchers who try to understand the neural basis of intentions. Like when we have intention, how or does our brain process and compute decisions? But yeah, the debate for free will, no free will, based on the Libet studies, I haven't seen something truly new in the recent years.
All right. So, like Emily said, she has shifted more towards the neuroscience of obeying orders and all that. And her recent book is also on the same. So, she went to countries like Rwanda and Cambodia, where genocides happened in the last few decades. So she studied the psychology of the perpetrators of the genocide. And so we would like to know what your challenges were. What challenges did you face while conducting research in those countries? If you could quickly, briefly say about that.
Yeah, because there are so many challenges that it's hard to mention. It's very not common. Yeah, I would say there are three main challenges. The first one is to find actual genocide perpetrators. And because, I mean, of course, I could, for instance, I'm from Belgium. Germany is next door somehow, so that would be an option. But it was too
long back,
many decades ago. So the perpetrators, they're barely not alive anymore. So, I mean, in terms of access, it's not really possible. So it means that I have to find countries where genocide occurred and where I can access the country and those populations. And for that, it means that I need to have a country where the genocide has been officially recognized. For instance, there are many genocides on Earth at the moment, but since it's not officially recognized as such by the governments, or because it's still ongoing, I cannot really access to say, oh, look, I'm going to study why you are doing this. Of course, it will not work. So the first challenge is actually to find where it is possible. And in Rwanda and Cambodia, it was roughly 5 to 3 decades ago. So the perpetrators, they start to be old, but they are still alive. So, and the countries are open to study those research questions. So that's unique opportunities. A second main challenge is actually more the emotional part. I mean, it's not, of course, an easy process to face former genocide perpetrators, to hear their stories, to hear what they did to other human beings. It requires a lot of preparation, and there are days where it's not easy. When I started doing this research, before meeting actual genocide perpetrators, I started reading books with some of their interviews just to be prepared regarding what I was going to hear, for instance. And yeah, in the first weeks or months, I was doing nightmares all the time. It was really not an easy process. Now I'm more used to it, so that's okay. But yeah, the emotional part is complex because sometimes you may meet with victims in the morning, the perpetrators in the afternoon, and you have to just manage all these different kinds of emotions that arose. So yeah, that's not an easy part. And the third one is actually to find funding to support these research projects. Because of course they can have a huge societal impact, but since I want to bring more a neuroscience perspective, it raises deep concern regarding feasibility. So there were people who interviewed former genocide perpetrators in the past, but they do that with paperwork or audio recorder, which are easy to carry and are not scary. But my plan was to do that, but also to record their brain activity with, for instance, electroencephalography. And so I mean, you have to, most of the time in those countries, these types of material is not available. So I have to find a way to carry them from Belgium up to there. And then I have to convince the local population to wear these equipments. And most of the time I do that in rural regions where they don't have access to this technology. So they have never seen a keyboard in their life or a computer. And I ask them to accept to wear weird electrodes on their brain, and I have to convince them that it's not going to hurt them, and I have to teach them how to use a keyboard to make tasks. This is not easy, of course. And when I started to do this, or I was willing to do this, I was denied some major funding because, yeah, the reviewers just say, but it's impossible to do neuroscience research in Rwanda on former perpetrators. I mean, no one did this before, so not possible. But in the end, I managed to have small postdoctoral grants in the beginning that allowed me to fund 1 or 2 studies, which allowed me to prove that it was possible. And now, actually, it's much easier, and I have access to main funding sources to fund these research projects. So that's great. But it was very not easy in the beginning.
So while I was listening to your audiobook, there were a lot of instances in which I was really impressed by the work that you did. I could imagine how hard it was. I was able to empathize with you, the emotional difficulty, and also all the physical difficulties and the feasibility, like you said. I was really impressed by the work that you did, and I really appreciate you for doing all this. It's commendable, to be honest. I can't imagine doing that. It's unimaginable. But you've done something that not many or nobody else has done before, I guess. So I appreciate you for that. Thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you very much. That's very good.
That's okay. So my next question would be regarding genocide. Why do you think that the perpetrators of genocide end up committing the crimes that they do? What is the psychology behind that? And do you think it's hiding behind the curtains of power, or do you think that orders have that psychological deterministic power to force people to do that? What do you think?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question, and that's a very complex answer, because, yeah, when it comes to perpetrating atrocities, notably in the case of a genocide, this is not something that happens suddenly. So I first became interested mostly in following orders and how our brain reacts when we follow orders, because I was inspired by what former perpetrators say during genocide. So in the Western world, the most famous example that we have are the senior Nazi officers that were prosecuted during the Nuremberg trials, and their main line of defense was, we just followed orders, so we should not be held accountable. And of course, this was viewed with a lot of skepticism because they had a clear motive of avoiding punishment or jail or prosecution. But actually, what is interesting is that when you look at other genocides elsewhere in other cultures, the perpetrators, they actually report the same justifications. So for instance, in the interviews I've done in Rwanda with former genocide perpetrators, majority of them, 70% of them, report that they did participate in the genocide because they were following orders. And here it's just already a totally different event, it's a totally different culture, but still they use the same justification. But I mean, in Rwanda, there was a huge effort to prosecute all the perpetrators. And actually, many of them had been put on trial during the Gacaca trials, and they were condemned to jail. And so we could also say, okay, perhaps they come up with this justification to avoid jail or to have a reduced sentence. But then when I was interviewing former members of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, they come with exactly the same justification. And again, it's a totally different culture, totally different context. And there, they don't face the risk of any jail sentence. Because in Cambodia, they consider that only the top leaders of the Khmer Rouge should be held accountable for the decimation of a quarter of the Cambodian population. So it means that all the executioners, those were lower in the hierarchical chain, They killed a lot of people, but they will never risk any sentence or anything for what they did. But still, they justified their participation with the just following orders argument. And I found it very intriguing that there are so many different human beings, different continents, different cultures, different historical events that use exactly the same justification. And I did wonder if it could reflect a reality somehow in their brain that explained that they could participate in a genocide. But of course, I do not mean that obeying orders is the only elements that facilitate participation in genocide. It's not because suddenly I'm going to tell my neighbor, oh, go kill another neighbor, that they're going to do it. Of course not. Genocides occur because there were a lot of different events that happened. For instance, it usually arose from a context of economic or political instability. It also comes in societies where there are strong group categorizations or where some groups in the populations are strongly dehumanized. All these are factors that influence our psychology as human beings and our decisions. And so only following orders is not sufficient to create an entire genocide. It's more the execution phase, how we can convince people by reducing their responsibility to participate and to conduct the genocide. But I do think it's very it has a major role here. And yeah, actually, I'm not really sure why our brain reacts the way it reacts when we follow orders, but it's definitively, I think, one of the main factors.
Sure. So I think one of the factors could be a propaganda that governments start. They just light up certain sparks here and there, which are small factors that could influence collective consciousness of a country. So they light up sparks everywhere. Those sparks just ignite into flame, into a huge fire, and that becomes a forest fire throughout the country. So a biggest example for that is the Nazi genocide of Jews. We know that how much propaganda had a part in it. So that's one factor. And the other factor, like you said, is our own evolutionary psychology. I think hierarchy is a very powerful factor to create reduced feelings of responsibility, moral responsibility in people. So people use hierarchy as a get-out clause from absolving themselves of moral responsibility. So I think it could have evolutionary explanations, like just following orders. We just have a certain proposition that you have to follow, and we know that we are following orders from a higher authority. So that becomes easy for them. Even biochemically speaking, it becomes easy. There's not a lot of energy and time that is invested, and we can save a lot of energy and time. So evolutionary speaking, also, it makes sense to just follow a particular order rather than rationally thinking and then calculating which one is the best option to choose in a moral dilemma or something. So yeah, it could have a lot of factors like those. And there are certain other factors, like I said, just like government ordered me to do it, and there could be other examples as well, like my parents ordered me to do it, my family ordered me to do it, or my relatives or my friends commanded me to. They wanted this, so I just did this for them, even though it's immoral, or even though I know there's some wrong element to that. I just don't care. I just love them so much, or I adore them so much, or respect them, that I will have to just follow their orders. So yeah, that's a dangerous thing in human society, and I hope that kind of reduces in the future. Yeah, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so honestly, I've been trying to think a lot about, how is that possible that our brain are so sensitive to following orders? And I don't have a clear answer to this, but I think there is a big role of our evolution in there, because I mean we are huge social groups. we have evolved and we have succeeded as a species because we organize ourselves into groups, following orders, following rules, following whatever. And I think that's one of the main reasons why we are at the top of the food chain, why we are so successful. But I think that the side effect of it is that our brain somehow disengages responsibility when we receive orders, because it might think, okay, I'm following a rule because it's good, because it may facilitate the organization of my society. And the brain is known to try to spare resources when it's possible. And so because it may react to obeying orders or to rules by saying, oh, then I don't need to process that information, I will just use less resources to process what I'm doing, to make a decision. And I think it has to do with that, and how our evolution has made our brain like using less power to process our decisions and the consequences of our decision. And yeah, of course, experimental evolutionary psychology is very difficult to conduct, like to create studies to test these hypotheses. I guess one option would be to see if we can find, I don't know, tribes on Earth where they don't rely at all on those hierarchical structures or so many social rules. But I don't know of any. I don't know if you know of some. That would be interesting.
Yeah, from what I could think of, the tribes in Amazon or Andaman and Nicobar Islands, which are extremely remote and secluded from the modern society, even in them, I think there is this culture of following orders. There's this culture of respecting the elders, or maybe adoring their wisdom. So I think it's a human thing rather more than cultural thing. It just comes naturally through evolution that following orders make sense, because maybe it could be that the more older you are, generally it's the case that the older you are, the more wise you are. And even maybe the younger people sometimes recognize that, and it becomes easier for them to just follow their orders, whatever they are teaching them. And a good example for that is also religion, like religious indoctrination happens. So the parents just kind of teach from a very young age about God, and they just start following God and start worshiping and believing in God. So following orders becomes easy. It becomes easy to believe in God. Okay, I don't have to rationally think and waste my energy and mind to start to think whether God really exists or not. I'll just follow orders. It becomes easy for me. It becomes second nature, default setting for them, if you're doing that from young age. So yeah, following orders of parents, following orders of governments is an easy thing to do, not only in modern culture or whatever culture. I think it could be the case in most cultures, even in tribes here and there, in remote areas. Yeah, but to be sure, we'll have to conduct research. Obviously, we can only speculate right now, but only after proper research would we have empirical data to believe. But yeah, hope that happens in the future. More of that data is collected in the future.
Yeah, I think one other option would be to test other species. That's one I have at the moment, because we see some non-human species. Some of them rely on hierarchies a lot. Some of them slightly less. So another option could be perhaps to test this effect in other species, to see how evolution had played a role into this. That's an idea somewhere in my mind.
Yeah, exactly. That would be fascinating. That would be interesting. Like, do you know Robert Sapolsky?
By name.
Okay, so he has a recent book called Determined. I thought you might be knowing him. A recent book called Determined, which is a huge, massive book, totally against free will. He tries to prove free will doesn't exist by the neuroscience and stuff, endocrinology and all that. So yeah, he has conducted. He has probably invested 40 years of his life conducting research on monkeys in Africa. So he might have had, I think he has also done such studies in which obeying orders and stuff. I don't quite remember from his book. One of the books that I've read is Behave, in which he explains every aspect of animal behavior. Why do people do what they do, kind of animals or even human beings. So I think there's somewhere down in that book he has written something according that line. So if you haven't read that book, Behave, you would really like reading that. Yeah. Behave from Robert Sapolsky, and also Determined by Robert Sapolsky. So these are really good books which help study free will and stuff. Against free will, obviously. And we were talking about evolutionary psychology as well. So another book that I recommend is David Buss's book about desires. So that's a really fascinating book as well. It's pretty chilling, and the conclusions are pretty terrible to think of. But yeah, if it's the truth doesn't care about our feelings, right? Anyway, David Buss, he's a really interesting evolutionary psychologist. I think he's also called the father of evolutionary psychology or something. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but hopefully I will have him in the future in Curiosity podcast. All right, so my next question would be a bit difficult for you to answer. Maybe, I mean, emotionally, how was your experience at Auschwitz, Birkenau? So in 2017-18, I was on a spree watching Holocaust movies, and World War II, Hitler and all that really fascinated me a lot. So I was watching all those movies, and I was really, fascinated, and also at the same time felt really horrible about what all happened during those times. So I really have it in my bucket list to go to Auschwitz, Birkenau, and see the concentration camps, and witness it myself. And since you've been there, I'm asking you, how was your experience there? Please share it with us.
I think that's of course very difficult, but I think it's very necessary, because it reminds us what humanity is capable of, actually. But of course, it's nothing in comparison with those who have been there. But even as an external visitor, when you go to Auschwitz or Birkenau, you really feel how all this has been implemented. And for that, the organization they showed to systematically kill people was extremely well thought. And the camps are huge, and for instance, where they have the gas chamber, you can really see, like, okay, where the trains that had the people were arriving, you see the cells, the conditions they were living in, you see where they were forced to work, but you also see the gas chamber where they were exterminated. And in the other one, you can see the belongings of the victims, and so you realize the amount of people that have been exterminated there. But from the scientific perspective, you understand somehow better how all this has been able to be implemented, because of course we talked about propaganda, dehumanization, and that was of course true. So there was these messages towards Jewish people, but also towards Roms, or to Romas, Gypsies, or towards disabled people, physical or intellectual. All these people were exterminated. And actually, I don't know if they were aware of human psychology or not, or if it's just because it worked. But what is very striking, and you really see how they make sure that none of the people working there would feel really responsible for what was happening, because they had totally spread like the duties of the people. So there was one person that was in charge of conducting the train. There were some people that were in charge of just putting people outside the train. There were some people who were in charge of putting them in their cell. There were some people forcing them to work. There were those people forcing them to enter the gas chamber, for instance. And actually, it really diffuses
And
responsibility.
I've heard that they also used Jews for that. All these small tasks, they used Jews who are very healthy to do that. So yeah.
Yeah, and actually, so it means that none of those people felt fully responsible for what happened, because they might just say, "Oh, but I was just driving the train, or I was just putting them out of the train, or I was just conducting them to their cell, or I was just conducting them to the chamber." And all this had made of this a super efficient process to make sure that many people would be able to participate, because at some point during the visit, they also mentioned the fact that it was not easy for the soldiers that were there to do that. Of course, there were the propaganda, but still, it's a strong human thing just to kill other people or to treat them like that. And this diffusion of responsibility also ensured that the soldiers, for instance, would be more engaged into the process, because this diffusion of responsibility attenuates somehow the very negative consequences that you can experience following your decisions or actions, such as shame or guilt. And so when you visit those camps and their organization, you really truly realize how powerful and how old this was, and how is that actually been possible.
Yeah, that's interesting. So what do you think is the role of status, pride, and prestige and honor in motivating the perpetrators to commit the crimes? Status in the sense that Germany, the Aryan race, like that. Status, pride, and honor, like I have to follow my Führer, mein Führer, like that. What do you think the role of status?
I think, not only status, but overall, all these perceptions that my group is better than the other group, and the other group will threat my group and must have to be exterminated. That's very powerful. As humans, we are very sensitive to intergroup biases, and we have a very natural tendency to favor our own in-group. It can be via a social status, the color of your hair, or whatever. And we also have a strong tendency to try to protect our own group by being hostile, for instance, towards out-group members. And for me, this is one of the worst things that humanity is showing. It sounds very logical and natural in the sense that, we have evolved also in groups. So protecting your own group may make sense from an evolutionary perspective. But I think that because of this group separation and the fact that we are led to believe that our group is for sure superior to the other group and must be enlarged, this is one of the main reasons for all the atrocities that we see nowadays. And human beings separating each other into groups is, for me, one of the worst things that we have.
Totally agree.
I'm really impressed by those people who are not sensitive to this at all. And actually, I'm going to make a small transition here, because they are also the focus of my research. I've met a lot of genocide perpetrators or former genocide perpetrators, but I also naturally encountered people who choose another path. There are not a lot. We call them the righteous or the rescuers. And these are people who were from the same group, the groups that wanted to take power over another group. But instead of falling prey to these propaganda or following orders, they choose to risk their life to rescue people from the other group, which does not follow our natural tendency as a species. And instead, they saved life. And many victims during genocides, many of them, since they were systematic exterminations, they just owed their life to those rescuers who helped them and who transcended these group categorizations. And when you interview those rescuers, many of them, they report a feeling of shared humanity. Not all of them, but some of them, they report that actually they don't see any differences between any human beings, regardless skin color, religion, whatever categorization thing that we can give to humans. We are all the same. So there is no reason to hate another group of human beings. And for me, this is truly remarkable. And if everyone would have acted like this or be insensitive to intergroup biases, we won't have any conflict on Earth at the moment.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Richard Dawkins says that this selfless behavior that we have, although evolutionarily contradictory, it's not supporting evolution. It's kind of a glitch in the evolutionary system. That's what he says. It's a glitch in the evolutionary system. It doesn't make sense. What makes sense is to be selfish. In his book Selfish Gene, he says that. So what makes sense is to be selfish for yourself and your own group, your own tribe, but to transcend all that selfishness and to act selflessly and in favor of other groups is kind of a glitch in the system. But the best thing that happened when it comes to humanity, right? That glitch is a good thing, if it's a glitch ever. So yeah. So in your research, you met a lot of people who said that they did that because I was under a bad government, like the bad government argument was there. So just like that, you can say bad parenting or bad culture. You accepted that people were under bad governments, but there must also have been people who said the government is good and what they did was the right thing, that they stand for the government for whatever atrocities that they committed. So what percentage of people were like these who supported the government and were kind of defending their own acts?
Yeah, so indeed, when I interviewed the former perpetrators in Rwanda, many of them said, okay, we followed the orders of the bad government. Most of them, they had this. But of course, it's retrospective. It's years after the genocide. And of course, they have learned that what they did was not what had to be done. And then it's also a way to diffuse responsibility. You know, oh, I followed orders because that's a bad government who ordered me to do that. They give me bad impression. They give me false information and so on. That's also a way to diffuse one's own responsibility while saying that. And they all say that. None of them say, oh, we did it because we trusted the messages of the government. No one says that afterwards, but of course, afterwards. I think if they participated back in time, it's because they were sure that they were doing the right thing. It's because they were sure that they had to exterminate another ethnic group, for instance, for the sake of their own ethnic group. So that's always a difficulty when you interview people, especially for such questions that are very moral, very difficult. There is a difference between what you trust at point A and what you will report at point B, especially when you have lost in a way because this government has been defeated. But something interesting is that in the interviews, for instance, in Rwanda, actually, in those interviews, only a few of them report hatred of the other ethnic group as the reason for participating. I think out of more than 60 former perpetrators, only 2 reported that. And that's consistent with what other researchers had. And it looks like over time, or I don't know if it's because they don't dare to mention it. Of course, we never know. That's the problem with subjective reports and explicit questions. But it looks like hatred of another group is not what remains the most. It's more like social dynamics, like I followed the orders or I followed other human beings and copied what they did. But yeah, it's hard to know because I think, yeah, at that moment, they were truly convinced that what they were doing was the right thing to do. And I think that's also the difficulty during genocides, because we can all say, oh, yeah, but following orders to kill other people, of course, it's not moral. Why have you done that? But during genocides, because of the propaganda, the problem is that exterminating these people is the right thing to do for the sake of your own people. It becomes a moral act almost to kill other human beings. And that's the difficulty. During genocides, morality is blurred, morality is reversed. And we have an external view on this, like, how can you even kill another person? But this was the thing that they had to do because it was the right thing to do at that moment because of all the information they had.
Did you interview non-perpetrators?
Yeah,
and
you mean
why did they not join the perpetrators?
Yeah. So I started a couple of months ago finding two different categories. Those that we call the bystanders, so those who did not participate, and the rescuers, so those who truly risk their life to save the threatened group. Actually, I'm still analyzing the results at the moment. I think I will finish it in 2 or 3 weeks. But
Nice.
yeah, actually, that's a good question. For instance, for the rescuers, some of the questions that we asked to them was, did you decide on your own to risk your life to rescue others? Or is it because some people ask you for your help? So this is something that has been seen as well during the Holocaust. Like sometimes people acted as rescuers, but because someone knocked at their door and asked for help, and they decide to help or not. And actually, at the moment, from the data of about 40 rescuers of genocide, half of them report that they decided on their own, they had to do something. But the other half reported that they were asked for help by people and decided to help, which I think is also two different things. And some of the victims, they report that they tried to seek for help of many people, many denied help, but did not necessarily kill them. And yes, some rescuers agreed to help them and to hiding them in their home. And so for the bystanders, it's not always very clear. I mean, I don't have the data yet to have a support for this argument, but either they were never asked, perhaps to for help, for instance, or they were not fully strongly pushed to participate. It may also be for very practical reasons. They were too old. We had some who said, oh yeah, but in my areas, they were not members of that ethnic group. So anyway, there was no one to kill. That's a very practical aspect. But yeah, even for the rescuers, it looks like some of them became rescuers because they accepted to help someone who asked for help. So it may also be something with the context that played a role at that moment.
Okay. Was there any encouragement from the government financially? Is there any profit incentives that they've promised for the perpetrators? Was that a motivating factor for anyone?
You mean for participating?
For participating in the perpetration?
Yeah, so I don't think it was direct, but from the perpetrators, from what they say, actually, at least in Rwanda, I do not mean that it's the case everywhere. Many of them, the motivation was also to loot the belongings of the victims, and actually many of them were also involved in looting activities. So they killed the families and then they took this for financial benefits. I think it was clearly not the main motives, at least in Rwanda, but of course it helped participating into these actions. But that was not necessarily the case, for instance, in Cambodia, where people were killed because they were told to threat the political ideology of the regime. Everyone was very poor at that moment. Many people, even from the perpetrators, died from diseases or starvation. So there, from what they reported to me, it didn't seem that there was a financial incitement to do it, as far as I know, but it's just based on those I interviewed. But in Rwanda, yes, looting is very frequently mentioned.
In Cambodia, was it between two different economic groups?
Yeah, in Cambodia, for me, honestly, that was more difficult to understand, because
Yeah.
for the Holocaust or World War II, that's pretty straightforward. That was towards Jewish or disabled people or gypsies or Romas. Okay.
Yeah. Hmm.
I mean, ethnic division or religious division is very common, so it's easy to understand. In
Yeah.
Rwanda, that was an ethnic division, so easy to understand. But in
Hmm.
Cambodia, when I started, because it's not something that I learned at school, I mean, that's something that I learned afterwards.
Hmm.
And I really had a hard time trying to understand how they could convince Cambodian people to kill other Cambodian people from the same ethnic group, the
Yeah.
same religion, the same language, the same everything, to
Yeah.
exterminate them. That didn't make a lot of sense. And actually, it was more related to political or ideologies, opinions. So when
Hmm.
Pol Pot took over the country, he wanted to create a classless agrarian
Hmm.
society, a bit such as Mao Zedong did in China.
Yeah.
And he wanted no classes between people, and he wanted that the whole country worked together without any private properties, without any differences between human beings, just to make sure that, to ensure the economic stability of the country with the production of rice. And
Hmm.
they actually decided that anyone who didn't agree with this should be exterminated. So it
Hmm.
was more, yeah, political ideologies, but actually they had a very strict ideas that, for instance, whenever they thought, real or not, that one individual was against their ideology, the
Hmm.
whole family had to be exterminated, even the babies. And whenever there was
Crazy.
any suspicion towards a person, as I said, be it real or not, the
Hmm.
person had to be exterminated. And so many people died and were killed because of that. But many people
That's
also died
horrible.
because of the diseases and the starvation, because it didn't work.
Okay.
The plan was to produce tons, I don't remember how much, tons of
Hmm.
rice per year, but it didn't work. People were starving to death. They had rejected the Western medicine because it didn't fit with their new ideas of the Cambodian society. And so,
Okay.
so many people died also of diseases and stuff like that. So, yeah, the
Crazy.
division there is different than the division that we may have seen in Rwanda or in the
Yeah.
whole.
Hmm. There's one famous, it's quite small genocide that happened in India, in Jammu Kashmir, which is called the Kashmiri Pandit genocide. If you're aware of that,
I
it's a
know about it,
religious.
but I don't know the details of it, but I heard of it, yeah.
Yeah, it's a religious genocide. So Muslims genociding uh, Kashmiri Pandits, the Hindus in Kashmir. So yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, actually, that happened as well a bit in Cambodia. I said that the main reason
Mhm.
was ideology, but
Yeah.
Muslims in Cambodia were also systematically targeted by the regime.
Okay. Okay.
So
So something like that is also happening in China, I guess.
yeah, the Uyghur.
S-
Yeah,
small genocides. I mean, ethnic cleansing
yeah.
of Muslims, which are not following the government or have different views than the government. Maybe that's happening. I've
Mhm.
heard. Hmm.
Yeah, but it's hard
Uh,
to get information because the information that
exactly.
we have on the Uyghur as is very, very restricted. But
Okay.
yeah, there are really credible evidences that they are conducting a genocide there. Of course, genocides have many forms, can be killing other group, but it can also be forced sterilization of the women to make
Hmm.
sure that they don't give any children. And that's
Hmm.
one of the form that has been mentioned there.
Right. 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 You did sense of agency experiments, right? So talk us talk to us more about that. What did you find about the relation between the dopaminergic system and the sense of agency?
Yeah. So I didn't directly target the relationship between dopamine and sense of agency. So
Hmm.
I became interested in the sense of agency because that's per definition um, the feeling that we have that we are the author of our own action. And because we have a sense of agency, we feel also responsible for the consequences of our own actions. And actually, the sense of agency one was the first neurocognitive processes that I investigated to see how obeying orders impact the brain. And actually, when you measure the sense of agency, you know, it's a conscious experience that we have. Like, we know that we have a sense of agency. If I take this pen, I can say, okay, I'm the one taking it. And we know that we all have this, but it's a conscious subjective experience. So it's very difficult to investigate with experimental method. And there are two main ways in the literature. One is to ask explicit questions to the participants, like, okay, you just did an action. Do you feel that you are the author of that action? But the problem is that it can be highly biased by social desirability, because, of course, people, it's well known, have the tendency to reduce their authorship and responsibility when the consequences of their action is negative, and to enhance it when it's positive. And during obedience and for instance, the just following orders arguments, of course, people have a clear motive of reducing their involvement, authorship, and responsibility because the consequences were an entire genocide.
Yeah.
So it may be not adapted. And so in the literature, there is this other task based on time perception, which is used as a proxy for sense of agency. And so I'm just going to give you a brief example. It's not perfect, but it's like if you are in the waiting room of your GP and the GP is delayed, so you're waiting. If you are not doing anything, like you're just waiting, you may have the impression that the time goes very slowly. While if you have a book to read, or you have friends nearby to discuss with, or something like that, you will have the impression that the time goes faster, while the time goes exactly at the same speed. It's just our subjective experience of time that is different. And actually, there are different studies who have shown that when we do voluntary actions, we have the perception that the time goes faster than when we do involuntary actions. And this is thought to be linked to the dopaminergic activity, because dopaminergic activity is linked to time perception, but is also associated with conducting the information from the basal ganglia through the frontal cortex, the motor cortex, to create this experience of agency. It's not a direct link, it's what we say, it's a proxy for the sense of agency. And so in my studies, I use this method because when you ask people to estimate time between their action and a consequence, for instance, there is no way they guess that it's about the sense of agency. So there is less risk to have social desirability biases. And when I designed a first study on that question, what I did is that I asked participants to either press a button that would deliver a mildly painful electric shock to a victim in front of them, but they would earn an additional small monetary gain for themselves, or to press a button where they would not send the shock, but they would also not earn money. So that was made to create a moral decision. Should I hurt someone to earn money for myself or not? And what I did is that either participant had to do it freely, so they were just totally free to decide which button to press, or they had to follow orders. An experimenter was giving them orders to do those actions. And I studied the sense of agency with this implicit proxy based on time perception whenever they were free or were following orders. And actually, you know, when I first designed this study, I didn't expect to see a difference on the sense of agency, because the sense of agency is, per definition, the feeling that you are the author of your own action. So actually, whenever you obey an order, you're always the author of your action. Yes, you have received the order from someone, but you are still the one carrying the action on your own. So I thought, perhaps it's not going to have an impact on the sense of agency, that following orders. And actually, with these implicit measurements, I did observe that it was the case. People seem to have a reduced experience of agency when they follow orders, compared to when they are acting freely. And that's already a quite strong effect, because it shows that, yeah, obeying orders seems to impact our own perception of being the author of our own action, even though we are the author of that action.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it also ties in with free will a lot. Like, people are themselves claiming that when they're obeying orders, they're doing it of lesser free will, at least, than otherwise. So I don't know whether you're aware of Sam Harris's. Have you seen Sam Harris's videos or not? So he kind of helps us understand how it's easy to, cut through the illusion of free will and experience the lack of free will. So for example, when you meditate, so you can easily realize that thoughts are just popping into consciousness, and you're not creating them freely yourself. You're just free in your consciousness, and just thoughts just arise one after the other, and maybe some thoughts have no relation with each other, but you just realize that they're coming out of the blue, from the background, unawares. Like, we don't know what processes are going on in the brain, subconscious or unconscious, but they just cook up certain thoughts in the form of desires or intentions or whatever, and they just pop up into our consciousness, and we just experience it in our consciousness. But in our normal daily life, it feels like we are the ones who are creating those thoughts, but we can easily cut through that illusion. So yeah, and I thought that was interesting.